Hey, AFAM 1211 students. Dr. Regalado here with Dr. Smith.
Hi.
So we promised that we would have asynchronous material for you while we were out of the country. And so we're here to talk about some of the main points from Patricia Hill Collins, Black Feminist Thought.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just going to go over a few of the main learning objectives that we want you all to come away with, and Dr. Smith is going to give some commentary to each of those points. So there's three main takeaways. The first one are the forces of suppression, right, of Black feminist thought. The three being economic exploitation of Black women, right, the historic exploitation since the transatlantic slave trade up until the 21st century. The second one is the political disenfranchisement of Black women. And the third, the controlling images, right, of Black women. The Mammy, Jezebel, and Sapphire tropes that sort of depict Black women in very restricting and singular in singular ways. And so, Dr. Smith, what are maybe some historic or contemporary examples of these forces of suppression at work?
Yeah. So I think to start really conceptually, what's important to understand with this chapter is, and my kind of thesis that I want you to walk away from this when you're reading it, is that Black women aren't women. And not in a way that we have a discourse right now about who's the woman, like biologically and all of that. You can argue with someone else about that. But the point of one of the points Patricia Hill Collins is trying to make is that Black women exist outside of the cultural understanding of what it means to be a woman. And so because Black women aren't women, right, or in our culture they cannot function as women function, we have to find ways to dehumanize, divorce, and remove them from our cultural understanding of what is a woman to perpetuate, right, their disenfranchisement, their economic suppression, and their, inability to function in society as women. So some things that, you might be familiar with is, the Mammy, the Sapphire, and the Jezebel. Those are three tropes that we see. The Mammy, the Help. If you've seen The Help, right, what a Mammy is, I'm sure. Aunt Jemima, warm, welcoming Black woman. A lot of times the Black best friend is a derivative of one of these kind of ideas of the Mammy, like the magical Black person. We'll talk about this more in class with more examples. And then you have the Jezebel, which is like a hypersexualized version of a Black woman, and that's something that's very prevalent in our media. And then you have the Sapphire trope, which is like the angry Black women. A lot of times it's like associated with being ghetto. So we have those stereotypes. Why do we have those stereotypes? Because Black women can't be women. So they have to fit into one of those three stereotypes to function in our society. And we talk a little bit about the economic exploitation, and you see some of that in these tropes as well, because you see the Mammy, right? That is the economic exploitation of Black women that has existed. We talked about, in my class at least, we talked a little bit about this, about Black women being domestic laborers. Again, think about The Help. And Help is a great example because that movie, it was actually considered really good at the time. But you can see the relationships that the Black maids have with the white people's children, right? So that's kind of the Mammy. But you can also see that they are not able to have any economic agency. They're working for very low wages. And so those are just some of the ways that we can see it happening in our culture. It doesn't look exactly how it always has looked. But if you kind of look at our culture and our society with the lens of Black women are not women, you'll see all these different ways that we dehumanize Black women as a way to exclude them from the cultural narrative to really validate the way that they experience life in the United States.
Yeah, thank you. And how all of these three forces of suppression work as interlocking forces, right? They don't operate independent of one another. They work, in tandem with one another. So the controlling images, these are images that they're not random, right? They're used to legitimize the exploitation, the economic exploitation, the sexual exploitation, right, of black women. Making it common sense that black women are not just caretakers and caregivers for their own children, but for really everyone, right? That is a way of making the exploitation of black women as caregivers common sense, or make it seem natural. That the notion that black women are hypersexual, that legitimizes the sexual, violation, the rape of black women. And then the sapphire trope, right, is a way to suppress resistance and rebellion, right? To make it seem like when black women are angry, or this idea of the angry black woman, that's a way to shut down, to kind of ridicule,
And delegitimate.
Right.
Delegitimate anything that we could actually be angry about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the first one, the kind of interlocking forces of suppression of black feminist thought. The next thing is, Patricia Hill Collins talks about black feminist thought as a critical social theory, meaning that black women, through these experiences of oppression and exploitation, are positioned and socially located in a way that gives them a unique perspective and unique kind of set of really skills to address the issues of oppression. So Patricia Hill Collins talks about black feminist thought being a form of oppositional knowledge to challenge and disrupt common sense of our society, right? To disrupt and challenge injustice. And so what are some like real life kind of examples that you can think of in terms of this idea of black women or black feminist thought being a form of oppositional knowledge?
Yeah, and again, I want to call back to one of the things we discussed in class was this idea that understanding, like the class, right, is Introduction to African American Studies. Understanding that African American Studies is not just the story of black people and black, things as it relates to whiteness. And in black feminist thought, it's not just the history and story of black women or the idea that black feminism conceptually exists. It's happening in tandem to other social theories that are also going on. So that's why I want you all to really look at it as a lens, a praxis, an epistemology, and not just incidental things that have happened over the course of history that describe what goes on with black women, but rather a way of understanding, a lens that you can use and utilize to dismantle, oppression. So it's the same with like critical race theory. Critical race theory is not just the idea that race matters. It's a way of understanding what is going on. So black feminist theory is a way of understanding that you don't have to be black or you don't have to be a feminist to really understand and interrogate and use. And the reason why it's so valuable is because of what they talk about in the chapter, right? Black women existing in proximity to whiteness in a way that other black folks might not, right? But also not being enraptured by patriarchy gives us a unique vantage point to dismantle, to build something different, to freedom dream, etc. And so I want you all to see it kind of in that way. And I think a perfect example of this that you can use and look at is Sojourner Truth, who in her speech, Ain't I a Woman, which I always share the fun fact about that speech. The speech, if you've read it, you might have read it in high school. It's written in like Southern, like slave dialect. I don't know what else to call it, but it's like how you would imagine a slave to talk. But, Sojourner Truth was from North New York. So she actually had a Dutch accent. So it's just a little aside, right? That it's like, ain't I a woman? But that's, these are not really her words that were transcribed. This is somebody saying what she said several years after. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. But And a perfect example is this woman who cannot read, cannot write, born a slave, right? But is able to capture in one sentence, ain't I a woman, right? This concept that black women's subjugation is dependent upon the idea that they cannot access womanhood and femininity in the United States. And so and she didn't need, she didn't need a fancy degree from Harvard. She didn't need to be the first black person to go to Harvard or, go on a speaking tour or have the social capital of some of her contemporaries. There was a lot of contemporary black men that had a lot of social capital, that were respected and well regarded, even in white spaces, because they were intellectuals. She didn't need to have that to make that observation. So I think what that shows is that when you have a black feminist consciousness, you're able to crystallize and see and name and understand things that even people who have the intellectual tradition behind them and all the degrees and the papers and the words and the letters, etc., might not see because of your unique vantage point.
Thank you for that. And so the last kind of takeaway from this chapter is Collins talking about the need to sort of decenter the academy as the singular site of knowledge production, especially for black feminist thought, right? Because of the history through which black women have been excluded from and barred from the academy, meaning colleges, universities, right? And so she talks about the need to broaden the scope of who we consider an intellectual or who is capable of intellectual production. And so, you mentioned Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was someone who was not, a formally educated black woman, although there were during the time, Maria Stewart, you had Anna Julia Cooper, and then later, obviously, Ida B. Wells. These are all black women who, either had their PhDs or, had had some kind of schooling, but you had this, again, Sojourner Truth, somebody who made these incisive critiques of U.S. society, these critical pieces of commentary about how black women, again, are denied and deprived being able to live this notion of what a woman is in this society. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this idea of decentering the university, or decentering, or even the need to do so as it pertains to black feminist thought?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and it comes at an interesting time in our society because we are experiencing an unprecedented rise of anti-intellectualism. And I don't want anything that I say to be misconstrued as that, right? I believe that there is such a thing as an expert. There is such a thing as a formal education. And I think that those things always will and always have merit, and that's the reason why black people have fought so hard to get access to them, right? So if it really wasn't worth fighting for, we wouldn't have generations of people working to get access to that knowledge. And what's also true is that the way that we understand formal education was never meant to necessarily serve black people. In formal education, black people are usually the subject, right? A curiosity, something to be studied, to be interested in, or not mentioned at all. It's not meant to push forward the black intellectual tradition. It's not meant to excite or agitate the black mind. You're meant to be a subject of study. And so I think because of that, it's difficult to get all of the answers and to really develop a robust understanding of the black experience, or even ways of being and knowing within the black community, African American or otherwise, if you're stuck in an institution. And so I think that we have to be open-minded, but that doesn't mean that you have to reject any value that can come from being a part of the academy or formalized education. I don't think that means that black people need to not participate in it. But I think what it does mean is that we have to reckon with the fact that for 450 years, Black people were systemically locked out of those places. And so all the answers cannot be there. And I would argue all the answers aren't there for any people. And all the knowledge is not there for any group, even white folks who the institutions are designed to serve. And so I think it's a way of gatekeeping access to power. And so while I think most of the knowledge is not always there, most of the power is there. And so it's an important idea for Black people to understand that what you can get access to is sometimes not just knowledge, but rather power. And when you have a combination of the knowledge and power, that leads you to self-determination. But I think it's an important point that we have to remember that the answers are not necessarily within the confines of even the classroom that we're in and teaching in, and that the Black women's knowledge has been operating kind of in a different plane underneath all of this. And a classic example that we see is in the medical field, right? There are no shortage of remedies and cultures, and I don't want to get too woo-woo here because I do believe in modern medicine. I go to the doctor, but there's so many different things that we know for a fact that people have solved or addressed or healed or found ways of dealing with outside of formalized medical knowledge. And we also know that formalized medical knowledge, and in hospitals, Black women are 10 times more likely to die than white women are. So clearly all the knowledge is not in these institutions, right? Because they've been keeping themselves alive much better in home births, right, which are not progressive, which are dangerous, than they are in a hospital. So I think the medical field is a perfect example of all of the knowledge is not just within the institution, and that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be learned from that as well. So I think that using a Black feminist lens to interrogate just our world and your worldview, it allows you to decentralize where knowledge is kept and held, and kind of see that it can come from a lot of different places. And again, I would say the medical field, and just even things handcrafts and ingenuity and innovation exist often outside of those institutions.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so, those are the three main learning takeaways from this chapter that we want you to kind of come away from. Again, number one, the forces of suppression on Black feminist thought, economic exploitation, political disenfranchisement, and controlling images, that they work as interlocking forces, right? They work with one another, they're best homies. And then the second learning objective is that those circumstances create, a social location for Black women, a very particular location for them to develop a kind of, to develop a critical social theory, right, against injustice that Patricia Hill Collins calls oppositional knowledge, right? A form of oppositional knowledge, a very particular form. And then the third one, right, is the need to kind of consider outside of formal, or the formal academy or academic spaces where we traditionally understand where knowledge is held, to expand beyond that, right? Or at least extend the scope of who can produce knowledge and who can produce intellectual thought and where it can come from. So that's the first chapter. And so we'll see you again for chapter 2.